Thank you for making it down here. I don't know about you, but I felt like I was going to the end of the world as I kept coming around the corner and wondering if they really had a room for us today. Anybody surprised we had a Windows 10 for Education session during this? Yeah, one of our goals is we're thinking from a Windows perspective. In the past, we haven't had targeted sessions on Windows at the TechEd events, and that got rolled into Ignite here. The first time we really did this similar session was at TechEd in Europe, which was quite a while ago. There's a lot to talk about in Windows 10 that's very much focused on the education space. And so the goal of this session today is to cover a lot of that. It's listed as a 200 overview course, which it is. We'll skirt a little on the 100 side. We'll go a little bit on the 300 side, just showing some of the technologies in terms of deployment, the things that we can think about. I have a slide at the end of the session which highlights some of the sessions I think would be good to attend if you're interested in more information. They're not specifically titled education, but they're deeper dives into the deployment goodness, the new management functionality. There's a whole 75 minutes on Windows Store things that we'll brush through today and why that's good for business and education. So there's a lot of other places from a Windows perspective you can go to, and they may not say education that specifically, but the features and functionality are there for that. And of course, why are we, from a Microsoft perspective, thinking about education? Because we're in a time where it's changing significantly. 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, if we looked in a lot of schools, there were probably a couple different devices in there. We might see MacBooks and we might see some Windows devices. And as we roll forward, that was about the same time that tablets and the iPads were coming in. And if we roll to now, we see even a broader proliferation of devices. And there's things we as an operating system from Windows need to start doing to make it simpler for you guys to deploy that and to manage that for the educators out there. And that's the focus of what we're going to talk about today. Need to be a little closer to this. And there's a lot of things that in the educational perspective that teachers and educators, professors want to start being able to do. I was in a public school in New York City about 4 weeks ago, and we were talking to a physics professor about what he was doing in terms of some of this new technology. And he was doing a lot of it on his own. If anybody in here is from some of the New York public school systems, you may have similar situations. It may be different. I visited a bunch of them, and it was all different across there. They didn't really have dedicated IT to help them. But he was doing some amazing things. He taught an 8th grade physics course. And he had a tablet that he taped. So if we think kind of a flipped classroom perspective, he would pre-tape his lessons. This is what we used to as teachers do in the classroom, was teach the lesson, send students home to do homework. He was doing the reverse of that. He was teaching the lesson in a video format, posting it to his blog post. The students would go home and view those. They would take a short quiz, and then when they came in the next day, he had a pretty good idea of where everybody sat in terms of learning, and they could have discussions. So it cleared up the time in the classroom to really do the learning piece. And we're hearing a lot of this around the world when we think of some of these. The rest of these are really just some buzzwords from an education perspective, and there's ways that technology can fit in to help that. But I thought that was a pretty good example of what a cutting-edge educator was doing in this space. And then, of course, you need the devices and the connectivity, the OneDrive, the pieces sitting behind it to allow them to be successful in that space. And so from a Windows perspective, when we think of Windows 10, and that's really the focus of this session, there's 4 different areas that we'll cover today, things that are coming through that are better for education, that continue to make Windows a great operating system for a lot of those things I just put on the slide. And they really cut across here. That first one, if we think of the flipped classroom example, is better learning outcomes. Because when we get through all of this at the end of a school year, it's really about, has the student made progress? And the technology is there to help them make that progress. And if the technology is not helping with that, then we should think of another thing to do, because what we're doing doesn't work. Of course, affordable devices and solutions. When Windows 8 came in, there were more affordable devices that were coming out. But now as we're towards kind of that end of the Windows 8 kind of launch cycle, and you think of Windows 10 coming in, there's a much broader brush of devices that are available now. So we certainly have, and we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing to support that. We'll have devices down on the inexpensive tablet and clamshell range, And of course, up to the more premium devices, things like a Surface Pro 3, other types of Lenovo and Dell devices as well. We'll talk about some of the safety and security pieces. Some of the things were highlighted in the session this morning: Windows Hello, Microsoft Passport, enterprise data protection. Talk a little bit about how those fit into schools. And then finally, we'll wrap up with what are we doing to simplify the deployment process. Simplify it for net new machines, new devices that you're purchasing coming in, but also upgrading existing devices from Windows 7, 8 directly to 10 as well. And from an overall perspective, and this has been in a lot of the keynotes, a lot of the things you may have seen with Joe B. this morning. Terry Myerson has done announcements on this as well, but when we think of Windows 10, this is a lot different from a Windows perspective than we've done in the past, and a lot different than what other operating systems do on other devices. Windows 10 will cut across all of these devices. It'll be a very similar experience. If you saw the keynote this morning, you saw a little bit of what Windows 10 on a mobile, a phone device, or a small tablet looks like, and what it will look like on desktop as well. And I'll show a few of those features. But then, of course, it cuts all the way up as well. And they did talk about HoloLens as well as Surface Hub. But it is Windows running on all these. And so universal applications will be able to fit and run across all of these device types, even down to something as small as an IoT device that doesn't look like Windows. So the modern applications coming from the Windows Store functionality that we'll talk about, we'll be able to use across these. If we have kindergarten students or first grade students where a touch-first device works well, they'll know how to use that. But then if they go to a computer lab where there's an all-in-one or a desktop, again, a very familiar experience running across those, and familiar for Windows users regardless of where they're coming from. If you still have some XP or Vista, or for those of you who may have deployed Windows 8, very familiar experience. And so the first one, when we think of learning outcomes, I want to highlight just a few things as we look through here. And this is probably something you may have heard before. Windows 10 will be a familiar experience, as I just mentioned, regardless of the Windows operating system that we're coming from. And if you've looked at some of the preview builds, you've likely seen how that has been integrated, and we'll show it as well. And of course, it does scale across all of those devices we just showed on the previous page. And then, of course, great experience across the different areas. So lab carts, teacher devices, administrative devices, anything that we need to deploy within an educational institution, there are the right devices and the fits for that. Now, I want to switch gears really quickly and show a little bit of the user experience. I know Joe showed quite a bit of it. I had a lot that I was going to show. Maybe just a quick show of hands. How many people saw the keynote this morning, either streamed or okay, so quite a few. So I won't give as much of the user experience demo, since Joe focused on a bit of that. I'm going to try to show a few different things here than what he showed. But we'll start with some of the basics. Maybe. All right. So we'll start with the basics. And now one of the things you'll see, and we'll talk about this in the deployment section as well, this is just a Surface Pro 3 machine. I had Windows 8.1 running on it before, and I did an in-place upgrade to get here from this. So what it did when it did that was it brought everything that was on my existing device over. If I had stuff pinned to the desktop, it came over. My pictures came over. My desktop screen came over. Things that were pinned to my taskbar came over. But what you'll notice is the new stuff came too. So the new functionality came through here as well. If a user upgraded from Windows 7 using Windows Update, or Windows 8.1 using Windows Update, or you upgraded them, they'd have that familiar experience between the device that they upgraded from. And of course, from an overall perspective, we brought back the Start button and migrated some of the new stuff with that. So you kind of have the best of both worlds here. On the left-hand side of the screen there, you see that you have the All Apps, and I can click on that, and then I can get through all of the same stuff that I was used to getting through on previous Windows builds. If I click back, the other thing that users told us that they really missed in the Start menu here was a power button. And so you'll notice that that has also been brought back. So users who are used to doing specific things can do that with Windows 10. But we also brought in all of the new functionality here. So all of the new Windows Store apps that were introduced with Windows 8 can be put on the start screen here or the start menu as well, side by side with the desktops. And of course, it can be changed. You can add, you can remove, you can pin what you want there as well, and personalize it just like users did in the Windows 8 timeframe. Now, a couple other things to show here as well. In schools, productivity is such a big thing, being able to do multiple things at the same time on the same device. And business users do things like Alt-Tab and are very familiar with that. And we heard from a whole bunch of users that bring that forward to us and let us know more about it. So if we look down here on we'll see something called Task View. And if I click on that, what this does is it opens all of the windows that are open on my device. And you'll see I have a variety of things that are open right here. I have traditional applications or Win32 such as OneNote, but I have modern applications as well. Now from here, I can simply click on one of these and it will open up for me. So I see everything, I can get to it really quickly. Now the other thing that power users or in schools have done is to snap windows. So to snap two things side by side with Windows, have OneNote open with another application open beside it as well. For research or other situations, that's a pretty good experience. And what we've brought with Windows 10, if I grab it at the top and pull it to the right, is something called Snap Assist. And what you'll see is it snapped what I wanted to, but then all the other applications are open side by side. We really did some research on this, and when I heard about it, I thought, I can't believe we did research on that. The research was, if I snap one window or one application, what is a user likely to do next? And snap another window. But I have seen that we really did do some research on that. So to make that very simple, what we did here was, with Snap Assist, you can just click it as opposed to having to put those side by side. Now, in Windows 7 and forward, you could snap a couple of these side by side. And with Windows 10, you can snap up to 4. So you could get some of these here and bring them up and start snapping other things in here as well. And I'll just do 3 because I can rarely get 4 to work with the current builds. But you'll notice that I now have 2 snapped on the left, I have 1 snapped on the right, and I could do 4. So if I'm a teacher and I'm walking around, or a professor and I'm walking around giving a presentation, I could have 4 things open because I'm projecting to my large screen. Some of those could be information, and some of them I could be working on, like OneNote, and putting notes down. So continuing to progress along those lines of productivity, things that users from Windows have really used from us in the past. Now the other thing you'll notice here, there's a whole bunch of windows running on top of each other here. So if I just simply pull up a lot of these windows, the other thing we heard from users in the Windows 8 timeframe was that a modern application should run just like a traditional Win32 application. It should float on top of each other, like you see the modern applications running here. It should have similar tools to be able to do things. And that's exactly what we did in Windows 10. I have a Win32 OneNote. I have these 2 modern applications running right on top of it. So they window like windows. We don't have to know which one we're in. It doesn't open immersively and then switch me to the desktop or back to the start screen. So users who are familiar with Windows, the application system and everything else works the way that they would expect it to run with Windows 10 here as well. Now, just a couple other things I wanted to show, and Joe showed this morning, but when we think of Windows running across a broad brush of devices, similar to this 2-in-1, there's the new functionality called Continuum. And what Continuum does is it has some intelligence to know if I'm working on something with a keyboard on it already, or if I want a touch-first experience. And you'll notice my Surface is set up in what is considered mouse and keyboard mode. The windows are smaller, the start screen is smaller. If I simply pull off my keyboard and detach it, in the bottom right, hopefully in just a second, we'll see something that says, do you want to enter tablet mode? And if I click that, then my Surface will move into what is a touch-first experience. So this is an immersive experience. The start screen goes full, similar to what it did in Windows 10, but the other things are still on there. If I swipe from the right, that task view, which I showed before, is there. And if I click on one of the modern applications like the Money app, you notice that it did open immersively on the screen. So there's some intelligence as devices move back and forth to know, do I want a mouse and keyboard experience, or should I have a touch-first experience? And then if I simply switch this back in here, again, if the magic happens, it should pop out in just a second and say, do I want to exit? And if I say yes, then it simply switches back, and it gives me that mouse and keyboard experience that I would expect when I have that connected there. You can get to that through PC settings as well. If you prefer that immersive mode, you can flip it on even though you're in a mouse and keyboard mode. So just a quick few things coming forward from a Windows 10 perspective. The majority of these are things that users told us, businesses told us, and schools told us, educational institutions told us. We would like to see this in Windows 10 because we felt it was missing in Windows 8, or it stalled us in Windows 8 from a usability perspective. Yes, question?
Yeah, so one of the things that Windows 8 suffers from, especially on high-resolution DPI systems that have like my XPS 13 or 3200, is that even new apps don't scale well, or even legacy apps don't scale well. And then even what's more major to me is that when you remote desktop, they don't scale well. Has Windows 10 solved that issue?
Yeah, so the question was about high DPI resolution screens and scaling in Windows 8. I don't have a lot of the specifics here, but yes, Windows 10 has a focus in it to scale to the larger DPI types of devices, as well as to fit the higher resolution things like 4K coming through as well. If you want to stop by after, I'll give you my card, and then I can point you to some of the specific resources that are aligned with that. All right, so I'm going to switch back here to some of the PowerPoints here. And a lot of this we highlighted, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it in terms of the usability or the productivity that Windows brings to the table. We've done it relatively well in the past. But when we think to 21st century skills, these are some of the things that we're thinking about. How can we make these better? So things like collaboration, other things on here, synthesizing and connecting and creating, collaborating at distance. How can Windows provide a great experience for that? And the interesting thing, of course, with education, which may be different from a discussion we would have with enterprises, is that other parts of Microsoft are deeply ingrained in deploying and being successful in education. Things like Office 365, Skype, Lync. Skype is kind of going to take over some of those capabilities from a naming and usability perspective. OneDrive. So a lot of these things that teachers and students need to do to collaborate may be one of the first entrances now that schools are looking at from an education solution. And we need to figure out from a Windows perspective, how can we be the best platform for those? And so some of those other pieces that we just showed in the usability experience, the snapping, those capabilities, Microsoft Edge and inking, which we'll show in just a minute here, are some great capabilities that when you layer on Office 365 and the other functionality from Microsoft, provide a fantastic platform to do a lot of these pieces. And inking is one of those specifically. OneNote has great inking capabilities in it if you've used that. There are apps that can take advantage of those exact functionality as well. And Microsoft Edge, previously Project Spartan, we'll show in just a minute, has those capabilities as well. The thing with inking that we've seen in research and why we want to think of platforms great to deploy in education, different from taking notes where students are simply typing. When you're typing notes, you're simply more or less regurgitating the notes that are given to you. When students are inking, research shows that they're making meaning and they're doing these 21st century skills. And inking on Windows devices is great if you haven't seen it yet or tried it yet. And a goal as we're getting into Windows 10 and moving forward is the affordable devices that support great inking capabilities that the apps can take advantage of, modern apps as well as the existing Win32 applications. So we've got a couple slides on the two browser kind of story, if you will, for Windows 10. The first one here, which Joe showed some this morning, is Microsoft Edge. This was what was previously called Project Spartan. We're told to no longer use that name. But for education, there's a lot of great things when we think of Microsoft Edge versus what was Internet Explorer and what will be Internet Explorer moving forward. There's feature functionality, but first off, it's built for the modern web. So some of the compatibility things as we move from IE9 to 10 to 11, we would hear from schools, I can't access some of these new websites. I have to use Chrome browser for that. Spartan should access those. That's one of the functionalities of the modern Edge system that it has, is to be able to access that modern web. And then if it can't access a site because you need backwards compatibility, it will kick to IE, which is on the machine. So Project Spartan for the modern web, and you can still go back to access older websites, and other browsers do this as well. Chrome does that if it needs backwards compatibility. It'll open a compatibility of IE9 to access those sites as well. But the other really cool things, which I'll show just a quick demo is what are the other great things that a browser could do here? So let me pull the browser back up here and show a quick run through of what Spartan brings to the table here. And I don't have the new Edge thing that Joe showed this morning. If you're on one of the Windows Insider builds, you don't see the new E insignia for Edge. It still kind of looks like the world down in the bottom left for Project Spartan. But this is Microsoft Edge running on the Windows Insider Preview build 74, same build that everyone has access to in the Insider Preview program right now. And what I brought up was simply to show that the 21st Century Learning, there's a website for that to learn more about it. But to show some of the specific functionality here that Joe highlighted this morning is the browser, Microsoft Edge, has some great things that it'll do which are good for education. The first, if I'm looking at this website, you'll see kind of right up here there's a book up at the top of my bar here. If I click that, it simply puts it into a reader mode for me. So it gets rid of anything else, any ads, anything else that's on that site. So if I have something I want my student to read or I want to save to my reading list directly from here for later, it'll save it as this nice reading setup that I can go through here as well. And I can quickly get back to edit mode simply by clicking it off and exiting from there. And it goes back to the other mode. The other cool thing I thought that Joe showed this morning, if you saw that, was that when you click to reader mode, there's a plugin that can be connected, an extension that will convert foreign languages to English. So if you saw that this morning, he had a Spanish website up that was written in Spanish. So if I have my students or anybody who's out looking for different things and they pull up a website, and we do this sometimes, it's only written in some other language. When I click in that reader mode, it's going to translate that back to English for me, and then when I switch back, it'll go back. So kind of an added capability there as well. Now, just a couple other things. When we talk about inking, Project Spartan, I have to stop saying it, Microsoft Edge brings in inking to web pages as well. So if I'm doing some research and I simply want to share something, we can think about what that looked like in the past. It may have been copy the browser, paste, send email to get to someone. It could have been 5, 6, 7 steps to get them something like this. If I'm doing some research, what I can simply do is I clicked on the inking here, and if I wanted to pass along to one of my colleagues, hey, there's this great thing called the, and of course we're not going here, let me get some ink, do red. I can simply make markings directly onto this page, and then I could share directly to them simply by hitting that share charm there. I could also just simply copy and paste that directly to OneNote if I wanted to as well. So there's a OneNote snip up in the upper left, and I will pull this and show here that if I wanted to snap that, then I could simply cut a piece out of this, put it directly in OneNote, or post it to an email as well. So some nice functionality there from a usability perspective. If I'm a student doing some research, if I simply want to share information to users here as well. And if I simply want to exit out of that, I would just go back and get to the page, and it wipes it out. Now, the last thing, which is some interesting functionality, and I don't believe that Joe showed this morning, is that Microsoft Edge can be by default the PDF viewer on a device as well. So I just clicked on an image, which was a PDF download from that same website, and you'll notice it brought it up directly in here as well. It looks like the reader mode, but this is some of the other skills related to that as well. So there's some interesting functionality across all of that to do a lot of the things that we would like to do in schools as well. And then, of course, the nice thing, if I bring this up as a PDF, I can do a similar thing here as well, as I have that same Project Spartan Microsoft Edge functionality that comes with the browser piece of that in this itself as well. So we talked about Microsoft Edge being focused on the modern web, plus this new feature functionality for users, but which is also great for education here. Let's talk just briefly about Internet Explorer. And what are we still thinking about it for? Still access in schools to some of those resources that we can't access on modern browsers. So IE, as we move forward, will be for compatibility reasons. And we know there are those types of things in schools that Internet Explorer is still really good for as well. It will continue to be more up to date than in the past. So if we're thinking in the past, each time a new iteration of Windows came out, we got a new IE version, 9, 10, 11. The goal is for that to go away so that we won't have a lot of those same naming issues or things that pop up with modern websites with IE as well. IE 10 and 11 had enterprise mode IE in it, which was really even backward compatibility. That will continue to be the case here as well. Things for accessing even prior to IE 9 in terms of our compatibility. So that will continue to be there as well. And if you're looking at Windows 10 and looking at testing it for a variety of deployment reasons, right now, Internet Explorer is one of those fastest things that you can do some compatibility testing on to get there as well. Applications and IE 11. Now let's switch gears and talk a little bit about the devices and the solution side of the Windows 10 perspective. I wish I had a lot of new Windows 10 devices right now to bring and to share and to show. We don't. We just don't have those yet. They'll start coming out after RTM and Windows 10 comes out. But the goal here is, from a Windows ecosystem perspective, is still to support really what we expect from Windows. So to be for the variety of learning styles, to fit a lot of budgets, and to be for the variety of deployment models we need. So that cuts across a lot of different things when we think of what Windows can play on. If we think down at the early learning levels, there may only be a few types of Windows devices that fit in there, and it might be touch-first tablet devices. It might also be a nice two-in-one. But then we can think of new modern devices, things like Surface Hub or HoloLens that could be pretty miraculous in that space. HoloLens with Minecraft. Some really cool things that can happen there. And then, of course, as we move up, it really is a platform that students and administrators and educators won't outgrow because the learning experience extends across all of those. And, of course, up to the university level where it's fair game in terms of the device type that we would want to use. I don't have a demo on some of the other Continuum pieces that Joby showed this morning, but he showed Continuum working on 8-inch tablets as well as on phones, if you saw that. So what he showed was, and we could think of this at a higher level, maybe university or high school, the student has a Windows 10 phone, and when they dock it, it docks with the capabilities to be fully productive on an external device. I haven't seen that. I saw the build or the demo at Build, and then that one. It isn't in current builds that we have, but the ability to use a phone and be that productive has some pretty cool capabilities, especially from a BYOD perspective as we look up towards some of the older grades there. And now one of the things we certainly want to highlight is that it will make existing devices better, just loading Windows 10 on it. Now just a quick survey here. How many of you have any Windows 8 or 8.1 deployed in your schools or institutions? That's a pretty good brush there. So you guys likely saw, and those of you who tested Windows 8 and didn't deploy for whatever reason, we know a lot of those, know that when you deployed Windows 8 on a Windows 7 machine or previous machine, you got a lot of better fundamentals, and those will continue to get better. So things like battery life, loading Windows 8 on a Windows 7 device simply gave you better battery life because the fundamentals were better. Boot times. When we hear nightmare boot time stories with Windows, it's typically on Windows 7 or earlier operating systems. A good, clean install of Windows 8 can boot in 7 or 8 seconds. So you see incredibly fast boot times. So those types of fundamentals that we would expect, have gotten significantly better from 7 to the 8 ecosystem, and then will continue to get better into 10. I haven't seen the specific differences with Windows 10 versus Windows 8.1. It will be a lot less, it'll be more incremental than it will be generational like it was from Windows 7 to 8.1 for a variety of reasons. And of course, new devices and new innovations. So things, great pen capabilities, some of those which we showed on Microsoft Edge and that you might use on OneNote. A goal to get more devices in the education space with the same type of stylus. We know they break. We know that's a blocker for having inking in education. Doesn't matter what age we are, we tend to lose things or we tend to break things, and we need a simple way to replace that. As well as really focusing on what are other great devices that may be in the less expensive range that also have great inking. I'm certainly showing inking on a Surface Pro 3, which is a fantastic experience. If you look down at the Surface 3 that came out recently, going down into lower price range, the inking there is very good as well. And there are other great devices from Panasonic in that price range and other OEMs like Lenovo that are bringing in great inking. Sony has showed some ink everywhere capabilities where you can use your finger to do great inking across a lot of their devices. So I think we'll see more innovation in that space as we move forward as well and see more of it adopted. And then of course we'll see more two-in-ones. So touch, as well as mouse and keyboard that can convert into a variety of methods. And there's a couple that are shown more from a two-in-one innovation capability up here as well. Many more of those coming out in the Windows 10 timeframe across a variety of price points. And then, of course, revolutionary education devices. I wish I had a whole bunch more that we could share about some of these things like HoloLens. I haven't played with HoloLens. I've seen the videos. If you haven't seen some of the Build videos that they ran in the keynote for Build last week, there's a great section of it that focuses on HoloLens. And they have a camera set up to show what the gentleman who has the visors on is seeing, and it's pretty cool. And if you can think of that in terms of gamification or learning within classrooms or what we could do in STEM level classrooms, it's really cool in terms of 3D and being able to manipulate capabilities. Aside from the fact that we could all argue, 75% of student learning comes from being inspired or wanting to learn, to be excited about what they want to do. That's a pretty cool, exciting technology that hopefully can transition in simply into the educational ecosystem. Now, I'll highlight this as well here. Of course, in Windows 8, we heard, I love touch on touch devices. When I go back to my office, I still need my mouse and keyboard. The Universal Office apps can fit into that space. If you haven't downloaded and tried these from the Windows Beta Store, these are available, preview builds of Excel, of Word, and PowerPoint. I'm just going to show them very briefly. But they give you the full Office experience of these on a tablet or a touch-first device. And they're downloadable and distributable through the Windows Store. So they are universal applications in terms of scaling and the other functionality which was talked about this morning. So let me show you those really quickly here. And I have some of these on my screen. So the first one I'm going to start with is simply opening up the PowerPoint Universal application. I'm not going to show a ton of functionality. I'm not going to modify a whole bunch of things in Touch here, but I simply just wanted to show that it's not a watered-down version of PowerPoint that we're going to get in these touch-first environments, which are great on that in the educational institutions. This is a full Office capability running here. And if I'm using this, this is an X1 Carbon. It's not a tablet, but it's a touch screen. I can simply swipe through, and you'll see it's taking full capabilities of the graphics functionality here. As I swipe through, a lot of great things coming through. So those touch capabilities really working in the Office suite. If I swipe down, I can get back to the other functionality here as well. So I can go back to my in-show, and you'll notice I can simply click through kind of the ribbon at the top here. It fits my fingers. That didn't work with Office previously, and I can do a lot of the same things that I wanted to do, but on a nice touch-first device here. Now, the other one I want to show really quickly is Word. We spend a lot of time doing Word documents. So I'll simply open Word Preview here. I have a Word document that was created by the Office team, a Contoso document here. You'll notice it opens up just like we would expect it to. But this also has that idea of a reader mode in it, similar to what Microsoft Edge has. There's a little, just a little book up there at the top, and if I click that, then my document goes into a reading mode. So if I'm reading on a tablet like this, I can simply switch and swipe through it, which is what I'll do. Now you'll notice that this has the editing turned on. So if I'm collaborating on this with another user, I can simply tap on that comment that's there, and I could add stuff in directly, or I could do the same types of things that I could do traditionally on my Office capability. So I could put a reply in there and say something just like thanks, and then close out of it and be ready to go. Now the other thing when we think of research and those capabilities, what I'm going to do is I'm going to highlight a word that I don't know here. So I have depth of field. And then if I click on that, if I have a document that I'm sharing or a document that a teacher has given to me and I have some things that pop up that I'm not sure what they mean, it's very easy for me now to look into that document, click on something, and then have it pull up in the background. So there's this word in there, this thing called depth of field. It pops up here. It pops up with a definition and also the Wikipedia page. So I could simply look at that and figure out what I'm doing. I didn't show that on Microsoft Edge, but I could do the same thing. If I put it into reader mode or I put it into something else, I could right-click on it, and Cortana would do the same thing for me, would pull up information here. So if I was researching, I could quickly find out new information and be ready to go. So we'll close out of those. Just a quick run through there. As I mentioned, with Windows 8, a lot of the things we heard was we love Office, we like Windows Touch, but we want to have the other functionality there, which is a touch-first experience with my Office suite applications for my users. Now, there's a couple of things here. The last one, this affordable solutions section, the Windows Store. And for those of you who didn't look at Windows 8, you may not have been aware of how it worked or some of the other things that may have been a little hard for businesses or education to do in the Windows 8 timeframe. Windows Store is one of those things that was tough. And one of the reasons, the first thing on here we'll highlight, is that it required Microsoft account. To get a Microsoft account, it's a consumer account, so it's not manageable by an institution. In the US, there's other things, COPPA requirements. If I'm 13 or under, I can't get one on my own without some parental interaction. So it's hard to get that Microsoft account. With Windows 10, we're bringing in the idea of Azure Active Directory as the ID that we would say to use in institutions. That's the same ID that's used with Office 365. So a lot of institutions may already have that deployed, or with Azure Active Directory in the first place. So Store will be accessible via that identity, which is removing one of those blockers from the Windows 8 timeframe. Now the other things here are things we didn't provide either. The Windows Store was much more focused on the consumer side. Volume licensing, being able to purchase paid or free apps in bulk and distribute those. That's functionality for Windows 10 as well. A flexible distribution model of how we get those to end users. You could email a link and have a user click on it and pull it directly from the Windows Store. Could use MDM or SCCM as a provisioning model, or you could do it offline. You could download one of those store applications and provision it in an image, so it's at the device level, maybe not the user level. And then finally, there's some curation. So the idea that as we continue to move forward, there will be education-relevant content that comes forward. So let's talk about what that looks like here. Right now, as the first rev comes out, it is being called the Business Store. We are working on different functionalities, so different facing, different curation capabilities, which will be called Education Store. They have the same capabilities and the same functionality, more or less. It's just that in the first iteration, it will say business. It won't say education or school on it. And we'll have more to share as we continue to go forward with that. But to really step forward what this looks like, the Business Store, so to do the distribution and the purchasing from the Windows Store, is an online portal. There will be an administrator, which is from your organization that has access to that and can then assign purchasers as part of that as well. So as we step through here, the portal itself is free. It's a functionality that can be signed up for. And then you can do a lot of the things that we talked about as well. Now, it does complement the Windows Store. So we know that there are Windows 8 users who have MSAs, or you have users that will have MSAs as well. A professor, an administrator, a teacher may want to also be able to search the consumer store and purchase their own applications. And so they can do both of those. When they access the business or the education side of that, what you've provided to them, it will use their Azure Active Directory account. And then they get to the consumer side using the MSA side of that as well. And then I mentioned this high level, but these are really the scenarios that we can think about of deploying the applications here. So online, offline, using MDM, using SCCM, directly from that business store, as I mentioned as well. It could be something as simple in a simple deployment as putting users in and then clicking send, and an email goes out, and the user simply clicks on that email and then downloads that application. So a lot of functionality here focused on removing some of those blockers that we heard both in education and on the business side of the house. We needed to be able to get modern applications from the Windows Store to be used across devices. At Build, they also talked about other content coming into the Windows Store that can take this as well. So things like books, things like wrappers for Win32 applications, other types of things they talked about getting in there, iOS and Android apps. So the ability for the ISVs to quickly convert those. So I think as we get towards the Windows 10 timeframe, we'll have the existing content, but we'll also have a whole bevy of new content that's coming into the Windows Store and will be accessible for organizations as well. Now on the safety and security side, the biggest focus, and I have a slide going into more detail, so I won't spend that much on it, is the Azure Active Directory and what that can bring to the table. But there are still the other methods of identity that if you're going to continue to use those, things like domain join, you can continue to use as well. Even local accounts if that's a deployment model that you use. But with Azure Active Directory, the goal here was to fix a few issues. It was to be able to give an organizationally manageable ID that you could use to log in, students could use to log in, that they could also access store applications from. And the Microsoft account didn't do that for us. As we continue to move forward, and we get into future builds as we're coming out here as well, some of those systems and syncings and preference things that we associate with Microsoft account, being able to log into a new device with my Microsoft account and have preferences and settings go, there's some functionality for Azure Active Directory for organizations as well. So some of that goodness, which was pretty cool in Windows 8, is also available in Windows 10 with that functionality. And then, of course, at the bottom, Azure AD can join more or less to your existing AD if you have an AD deployment. There's a variety of methods to do that as well, and to sync those identities up into the Azure AD cloud. They showed this one this morning. Yes, question? If you already have Azure?
No, if we already have federation through ADFS.
Yeah, so you can do DirSync or federation to the Azure AD more or less. So if you're already using a couple of those capabilities, you can use that same thing to link to Azure AD and to provide the capabilities into that. So Microsoft Passport and Microsoft Hello were two things that they demoed this morning. I have them kind of in reverse order. But Microsoft Passport is the ability to have a tough credential on a device. It is right now, and I've marked it on here, it is for one-to-one deployments right now. So if you have a one-to-one deployment, it's great. The reason for that is it's tied to a specific device, or a user has to take action on a specific device. So the way this works is that a user can set up a PIN, which is tied to the device that they're logging into. So my Surface here, I would go in and I would create a PIN number, which I can only use on this device because it creates a credential on this specifically. So if we think of passwords, The problem with a password, which this helps overcome, is that once I know your password, I can log in from anywhere that I have access to that resource. PIN is specific to this device. So if I'm trying to log into some resource, I have to use the PIN on this device specifically. So if my friends at work have my PIN, they can't access my resources unless they're on the device specifically themselves. As we move down the road, there's an alliance called the FIDO Alliance. It's all the big names. It's Google, it's Microsoft, it's Apple, focused on this capability. As we move forward, this will provide not only single sign-on within your organizations, but also to other types of resources on the web as well. So if I have a Facebook or a bank account, something like that down the road, I will be able to use my PIN and the credential on my device to log in. So if someone else, again, gets my password for LinkedIn, which I use for my bank account as well, they won't be able to access that anymore because it will take this next generation credential or Microsoft Passport on my device itself. And then if you simplify that a little more, and again, one-to-one deployment, and you think in schools, well, I can't remember my PIN, I can't remember my password, don't do this to me. If you saw that demo this morning of Windows Hello that Joe B did, he had a device with the camera on it, and there are a few devices that support that, have Intel cameras that support that capability today. There'll be more. He had to cover it up because it was so sensitive, the camera on there. Once he pulled off the cloth, it recognized him and opened directly. So it used this Windows Hello to recognize him, and then it was using Microsoft Passport with the credential on the device to unlock the device itself. Yes?
How does it be able to detect whether it's an actual live person as opposed to somebody holding a photograph?
Yeah. So the question is, how does Windows Hello know that there's this, and we call this in Windows 8 liveliness detection, right? You can't cut off a thumb and biometrically scan it, those types of things. How does it know you're alive, you're a live person? So the specific camera itself is an IR camera. It's an Intel, and I forget what the number is. So it's not just doing a 3D image, it's also doing some IR scanning of capabilities to recognize a whole bunch of stuff to make sure that it is someone that's alive and that it's not someone who looks like the person as well. So there's definitely a lot more that goes into that, and I could point you to some resources that really specify all the other stuff, but it's a very specialized camera. So other devices that we have today that have a front-facing camera won't support it because of that need. And then finally, depending on what level of organization or size of the organization, this could be applicable or not. But there's some VPN technologies that are coming into Windows 10. It was some stuff that we started in Windows 8 and 8.1, but it's nice stuff that can be taken advantage of. And it's focused on a couple things. It's focused on manageability, really, of a VPN tunnel. And the idea here is that the VPN can be application or resource URL specific. So if you have students who need to access one single thing that could be back behind a school or university firewall, when they need to access that, it'll kick off this VPN tunnel and they can access that. You may have teachers, though, that need access to pretty much everything. And if you're familiar with an enterprise capability called Direct Access, it's a little similar in the respect that anytime I'm on the internet, if I need my VPN on to connect to something, it does that. So it provides a very positive experience. If I need to access a SharePoint or something, it just connects and does it, versus giving me a message that says you're not connected to the network or something like that. So again, really focused on the manageability piece. We're working with VPN vendors. So if you have some of those out there, the big names, they'll be creating universal applications that sit in the Windows Store. So if a user needs the client app, they can download it directly from there. You can distribute it normally like you would as well. So some new functionality coming there from a secure remote access perspective. And then finally, I think in the 99% of the discussions that I have with schools, universities of any size is really fitting into one of these areas here, which is make it simpler for me to deploy Windows devices, because some other devices out there are simpler, they take less time. And we've made strides with Windows 10 to start to simplify that process. We will continue to focus more on this as we move forward as well. With this idea of Windows as a service, there will be new capabilities continuously coming through Windows. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. It won't be, we bring you something today, and then in 3 years, you're going to get a new Windows. But if we think of the deployment piece, we did a tour with a bunch of customers and companies about a year and a half or 2 years ago. And the number one thing they told, well, actually, it was number one or number two, I can't remember. Number one and number two were Internet Explorer compatibility and deployment. We can take our pick which one those fall into. But from this perspective, there were customers, big enterprise customers, that told us it took them years, millions of dollars, and thousands of lives to move from XP. And they were very serious when they told us this. And so they told us, if you can't simplify that, I really don't ever want to move again. And so this functionality that we're doing is helping with that. It could be the end of wipe and reload as we know it. And I'll show you one of those capabilities, the Windows Image Creator Deployment Tool. But it's also the idea of a managed in-place upgrade, and we really haven't supported to this extent before. Typically, we've provided an in-place upgrade from an N-1, so the previous operating system. A preferred upgrade for us, for Microsoft at this point, would be this in-place upgrade. So there will be from Windows 7 devices an in-place upgrade path that can take you directly to Windows 10. There's ways to do that directly through Windows Update. Any of you who are part of the Insider Preview program today, if you move builds, that's what it's doing. It's in-place upgrading you from what you're on to the next build via Windows Update. But that's also manageable through your existing tool sets that you might be using, things like MDT or SCCM. And we would certainly like that to be used. And then runtime configuration is an interesting one. And we've got a slide on it. It creates a provisioning package, and we'll show you how to do that in just a minute. But of course, the goal here is that reduced validation and the deployment costs. We've had millions of upgrades, devices that have upgraded from a previous operating system, from Windows 7, from Windows 8 or 8.1 Update to Windows 10. And we track that information. One of the main goals of tracking telemetry in the Insider Preview program isn't to know what people are doing. It's to reduce the cost and to validate what works and what doesn't. Anytime a device fails to upgrade through that program or at work, we upgrade every day, it reports back and says, hey, Microsoft, this is what happened. It's this device driver. It's this application. It's this thing that got in the way of upgrading, and then we look to fix that. So by the time we get to general availability of Windows 10, we hope to have removed most of those blockers that would easily allow devices to upgrade and to keep the drivers, the applications, the pieces that we want to simply keep in there as we roll forward. So as I mentioned, three workloads here. Wipe and load, things we currently do, the in-place, as well as the provisioning package we'll highlight. And as I mentioned, really the one we'd like to get to as we move forward as a preferred option is an in-place upgrade. Now we know this takes time, this takes testing, we have to believe, we all have to try it, we have to have everybody out there saying this works. And again, that's the goal of the Insider program, or one of the goals, is to have people testing and trying this, as well as early adopters, pilot, and tap customers trialing this to let us know what's working and what's not working with their deployments. And so these are just a quick few screenshots if you haven't gone through it with the Insider Preview program. This was a build that was kicked off using System Center as the process for doing that. But you'll notice this is a Windows 7 machine. You'll notice what's on the desktop, what's across the bottom. Once this kicks off, it simply just starts this process. And you'll see as it goes through screens, it pops up that Windows 10 upgrade screen. It looks different if you go through Windows Update and the Insider program. You get different messages as it progresses through here. It goes through. It will do some reboots. It'll let you know it's doing that. And then as it comes back, it has Windows 10 laid down. It's using a little different process than the way it's done things in the past to be more efficient and to save your documents, your preferences, your settings, your application, the things that you need to upgrade as you move between these devices. But again, the goal then is as you step through that process, you come up with Windows 10 ready to go. You haven't done wipe and reloads. You haven't had to create a new image and to put device drivers and everything back in it and test compatibility, because it's creating or it's keeping as much as compatible as possible. If it has access to Windows Update, it'll look to Windows Update for drivers, if you allow that, and pull down updated drivers if it's necessary as well through this process. I've had devices where this hasn't worked. If it doesn't work, it reverts back to the previous operating system that's on that device. So if I had Windows 7 on here, at the end of it, it would have reverted back to Windows 7 at that point, and it would create an error file letting us know what broke in this process. It's not going to leave it in a state where you've got a blue screen or something along those lines. Yes?
How's it going to handle whole disk encryption?
Say it again.
Whole disk encryption?
So the question was, how's this going to handle whole disk encryption? So the answer, of course, probably similar to answers we've heard in the past. It depends which whole disk encryption you're utilizing. If you're utilizing BitLocker, what it's going to do will suspend, kick off the process, and re-enable BitLocker at the end of that. The other big names we're working with, we have a group that works on the security side with the whole disk encryption vendors, big names you would know of, as well as the VPN vendors, some of the networking pieces, where we see some of the tougher things here. So the goal is certainly to work with them and have a process where it does work, but it could work differently or get kicked off differently depending on who you're currently using. And so this was kind of the end of wipe and reload piece that I'd mentioned here. For new devices, there's this idea of provisioning and not re-imaging. There was a tool created, and I'll show you that in just a minute. It's part of the ADK, and I'll show you where you can download it and start testing and trialing some of this piece here. But the idea is that you could buy off-the-shelf hardware. You could create a provisioning package with a whole bunch of stuff in it, and I'll show you the extent of things that you can put into this provisioning package. And then you apply that provisioning package through a variety of methods, which are up here, things like USB, things like an SD card. You could put it on a network share. You could tap an NFC card, which points to the share. You could email this package to a user, and they'd double-click on it. And when it ran, their device had a whole bunch of new stuff and policies associated with it, without having to wipe or replace, keeping the drivers that work on that device with the new image or the new capabilities that are on there. So let me switch machines here and show you where that sits right now to start testing. So this is the MSDN location up here. And you can get through it through the Windows Insider Preview program as well. There's a whole bunch of information on here about joining the program and a variety of other things. But as you go to the bottom of this page here, the ADK is at the bottom here, the Windows ADK for Windows 10. Now what you do is you would download that. There's 7 or 8 different kits that come in there, a lot of the usual suspects, plus this new kind of provisioning configuration creator tool. And when you download it, it goes into your All Apps location, if you're familiar with some of that, and it says Windows Kits. So right here. So you'll see the variety of Windows kits that are in here. And it's this Windows Imaging and Configuration Designer. And I already have it up kind of and going here. But when you open this, we're just going to spend a minute or two showing the things that you can do with this tool, which is different from what we've been able to do in the past. You could have created a provisioning package already, and then you could open it and change it or modify it. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to simply connect on New Project. And it wants me to name it. So we'll say Ignite Demo 2. I could put a description, a variety of other things. Now the tool will let me do a couple things. It'll let me do some imaging work, or it will let me create this provisioning package. And the provisioning package is what I'm really interested in here. So I'll click Next on that. I can target specific Windows editions. So if I'm using Enterprise or Pro, I could target that specifically, or I could target all of them, which is simply what we'll do here. Click Target All, and then the provisioning package would then work on all of these. I can specify the location or import a provisioning package as part of this. I'm not going to do that. I'm simply going to connect Finish. Now what it's doing is it's taking some of that basic information and it's going to pull up all the different things that I could change or add or create as part of this provisioning package. And so there's a lot of interesting things that we can do on here. Things like add applications, drivers, driver sets, features on demand, Windows features, language packs, data. The settings is the one which tends to be the most interesting, and I apologize for not getting this bigger. I'm having some Windows 10 Insider Preview issues with my ability to make this larger on the screen here. But there's a variety of things up here that I can impact as settings as part of this. And so there's probably some basic ones which we'd want to think about if we were creating a provisioning package in schools. WLAN profiles, those types of things, maybe some basic certificates, maybe some policies. If there were some of those apps from the new Windows Store that I wanted to make part of this provisioning package in a base build or put on devices, I could put those in here as well. The other thing which is pretty useful is I could kick off an upgrade from here. And that's the one that I want to show. You see this Windows licensing piece here. If I had my 5x5 key, if I bought Pro devices, for example, and I want to deploy Enterprise, I would simply put my VL key right in here, and I would have that as part of the provisioning package. Then when this provisioning package ran, it would insert all of those policies, those capabilities, the apps. It would also upgrade the device. So if it was an off-the-shelf Pro device I bought and I need to get Enterprise, I could apply my policies and upgrade it using this provisioning package. So again, trying to simplify that process of taking off-the-shelf devices and having them ready in schools. And as I mentioned just very briefly, there's a variety of ways to get that provisioning package onto the device. So it could be in an SD card. At Ubi, that first out-of-box experience, Ubi's looking for provisioning packages. So if a provisioning package was resident via USB or SD at the very first run of a device, it's going to pick that package up and have it ready to go. You could create a base image with a provisioning package in it as well if you wanted to do that. So there's a lot of flexibility about how we get these there. If we have devices coming in after the fact, we can apply provisioning packages to those as well, once we've already gone through the out-of-box experience. So there's really a variety of ways that we can take advantage of that functionality, not just on a first run of a net new device. And of course, I won't spend time here, but the traditional methods, if we're comfortable with the way we're deploying Windows devices today, we can continue to deploy Windows devices in that manner today. So doing traditional things like wipe and load, getting a device, creating an image, putting the device drivers in the image, those types of things are going to continue to be supported through tools like MDT and SCCM, like we may be familiar with using them as well. We're just bringing the new functionality forward to try to simplify the process that we go through to get devices in users' hands. Now, the last section is focusing on management. And one of the big management pieces when we think to Windows 10, it was started in Windows 8, was bringing MDM, mobile device management functionality, into Windows 8. Windows 8 had very basic MDM. Windows 8.1 to 8.1 Update brought more. Windows Phone still had a whole bunch more. But as we move forward and we think about lightweight devices and being mobile and moving around, using an MDM to manage all of the typical, or the majority of the typical types of things that we need to manage for a device with Windows 10 should be a reality. And I'll show a graph here of the number of MDM functionality pieces that I've brought in. We will continue to support the existing things of how we manage devices as well. But what that does for us is it allows us to manage this breadth of devices, Windows mobile devices, small phones, phablets, small tablets, large tablets, all of them in a consistent manner. You can do some of that with the hybrid model of Intune and SCCM today via the single interface, but it's still two separate systems and two separate ways of managing those devices. It's MDM or OMADM plus group policy. And of course, similar to the VPNs, we're working both with Intune as our first-party MDM, as well as with other MDM providers to get them ready to go when we get to Windows 10 to be able to manage these devices. It is an open stack of protocols. OMADM is what we use for mobile device management, so any provider can take advantage of it. And just from a high level, I mentioned this on another one, the identities. We can select the identity, the management structure, infrastructure, and ownership, depending on how we want to deploy. So we can cut across some of these depending on the deployment model there. And as we think of our existing infrastructure, when we deployed Windows 8, System Center was a little bit longer in terms of being able to support it. The goal here with these, with Intune, and with as many third-party and with SCCM is that when we do launch Windows 10, it's a hotfix or an update, but they will be able to manage and to do some of the provisioning and the deployment models for Windows 10. We want to be on board with all of our Microsoft partners versus having some other things come out later than is necessary. And so here is what I was mentioning verbally, but just kind of in a screen here. If we look at Windows 8.1 and the total number of MDM policies that were in there, and then look towards Windows 10, the goal is for phone and desktop to be compatible, but to be able to manage, again, what we need to manage via MDM through an MDM provider and not needing two different sets of frameworks to manage those devices. And again, first party as well as third party across all of those as well. Now the last item, this has been mentioned a bit, Windows as a service and the update model. How are we going to keep Windows current as we continue to move forward? It's a different paradigm than what we've done with Windows in the past. Having these easy upgrade processes from 7, 8, 8.1 up to Windows 10. And then having new features and functionality coming at a more rapid pace as we think it's necessary. The idea here is that there's kind of three different ways to keep devices up to date. There's the first one, which is a consumer idea, and that is where consumers who are connected to Windows Update will get updates as they come out. If that's a feature update, they'll get feature updates when they come out via Windows Update. Security updates will still come out like they have all along. There's this second piece here, which we would like to talk to educational institutions about. This is kind of a consumer branch in terms of what's coming, but it's from a business perspective. So this will allow institutions such as yourselves to delay when an update would come. So the idea here is the updates come through the consumer branch, consumers test it, you can do your testing on it, and then you can deploy that update to devices. Our goal is we want to keep these devices up to date. We want people to be able to take advantage of those little new pieces that are coming through. The security updates will continue to progress on that second branch as well, similar to the way they do today. Now there's this idea of the third branch here. This is something that we would think in the education space. Let's really think about where we would want to deploy something like this. This is a long-term servicing branch. This is the idea that Microsoft will support this for 10 years. It does not change. It does not get new features or functionality. It can get the security pieces, but it will stay stable with the functionality you get when that long-term servicing branch is declared over the course of this lifetime. In the enterprise space, we would say nuclear reactors, nuclear submarines, something that is highly impactful on updates coming through, and we just can't have them coming through. So a mission critical type of a thing. There could be some databases, right, student databases or something like that. But for the typical user here, that's not something we would want to see on a long-term servicing branch. So three ways as we continue to move forward of keeping devices up to date with the new good stuff that'll come through with Windows. So kind of in a little wrap-up, we talked really four areas here from a Windows 10 perspective. Across these things, the better learning outcomes, affordable devices and solutions, safety and security, and simplifying the deployment and management models. I'd love to hear from you guys afterwards. I have a bunch of business cards. If you'd like to send me an email and say, here's some things I'm really thinking about, you didn't touch on it, we'd love to hear it. As we continue to roll out this Windows 10 timeframe now, we're deep in what are we doing next? Not next as the next version of Windows, but as this Windows as a service, what are the things we're missing and what are the things we still need to improve upon? So as we do wrap up in just a second, I'll set some of my cards up here. Love for you to take one and send an email, even if it's just an email that says, I don't need to hear back from you, but here are the things that we really think you're missing on here. I would really appreciate that. Things to think about as you're thinking where you're at now. Running Windows 7, Maybe not evaluate Windows 8.1 as much today, need to update that, but think about Internet Explorer and moving forward. If you're on 7 or 8, start thinking about Windows 10. Windows Insider Preview program. If you're not a Windows Insider Preview person already, even if you are, if you come down to the Windows booth and you sign up or you sit through a session, if you're already signed up, they have some what I think, as a Windows person, pretty cool Windows t-shirts down there. So if you sign up, then they'll hand you some of these as well. Just signing up doesn't mean you have to download it, but if you have a machine to try it on, they are relatively stable. The builds are pretty good. If you do have something that you have your data on and you don't, still don't load it on that one, but give it a shot and see how it works. Test compatibility. Start testing some of those provisioning package things that we talked about. Test your apps. If you have some traditional Windows applications and you want to know how they're going to continue to run, test it on one of those machines and see how it's going to work for you. So that was what I just said. Stop by the booth. There's a welcome reception tonight. Also ask the experts down there. You can sign up and get your t-shirts here. Just two more slides, and then I'm happy to take a few questions. Please evaluate the session. You can put comments in there as well. If you think there's something we're missing out on, you don't want to send me an email, it's a valuable place to put a comment as well, things to think about. They're anonymous as they come through, so there's no way of tracking back to you on that respect. But go ahead and evaluate the session, put your thoughts in there. And then finally, this was the one that I'd mentioned. These are a bunch of other sessions occurring over this week. Since this was the first session, some later today and then through the rest of this week. But if there's one of these areas that piques your interest that we talked about in more detail and you want to know nuts to bolts about deployment, there are sessions for that. Or you have great questions on browsers, there's sessions for that, or management. The Windows Store session, talking about being able to do a lot of that stuff via the Business Store portal. There's a couple of the engineer guys who are going to be here demoing some of the live stuff related to that as well. So a lot more detail about all the areas we really covered kind of at a very high level today as well. So we have a minute or two. I'm happy to take some questions if there are more.
How would you compare the minimum hardware requirements for 10 as opposed to, say, Windows 7, which we've got a lot of older machines in school districts, so we have smaller hard drives and lower video cards and things like that.
So the question was hardware requirements and compatibility for Windows 10 versus 7 and 8. They've pretty much remained unchanged from 8 to 7 and 10 to 7. So if you have Windows 7 machines, 10 should run well on them. The one difference we always highlight is that there's always some new functionality. If you think in Windows 8, there was something called Miracast Wireless Display. So there could be some net new functionality like that you can't take advantage of for a specific reason, but the basics and the fundamentals of Windows 10 should run well on 8 and 7 machines. Yes?
The drivers that come in the Windows 10 preview, are those just reference drivers, or are those like
The question was about drivers in the Windows 10 preview. Are they reference? Where they come from? A lot of those are the drivers that were in the Windows 8 or 8.1 timeframe. There could be some, if we see them through the preview program, that need pieces. Then they'll get updated, and typically then those will get pulled down through Woo or possibly as part of the upgrade process that it goes through as well. And I'm happy to stay afterwards. I don't want to keep you guys. Don't feel bad if you get up and walk out. But thank you very much for coming. I appreciate your time today.